the next segment of our program, which is the public comment and discussion period. I have this unfortunate role. Somebody handed me a gavel, and I was trying to figure out, well, okay, I'm going to hit myself with this, but basically, what I'm supposed to do is if we get too far off track, or if we go beyond the 5 minutes, I start beating. And I like somebody was talking about earlier about where was it was it Parliament or someplace where you beat once if you go over, and if you keep on going, you beat twice, and third time if you're still going, you start beating so loud all the time that you can't hear the person. I'm not going to do that, I hope. So I'll hand it over to Claudia, and she'll take it from there.
So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to go in the order by which we had people sign up. We toggle back and forth between people that are in the room and people that are on the phone. So for now, we actually have a good list of folks that are in the room that I'll call. I'll start with Gordon Bennett, and we have a microphone right there if you want to use that. Yeah, let's do the microphone, and people on the webcast can actually see you on the camera. And what I'll do is I have my timekeeping right here. I will give you my Academy's red flag when you have 1 minute left, and then we'll go from there. So, and if you could briefly introduce yourself, that would be great. So thank you.
I'm Gordon Bennett from Save Our Seashore. I've been involved in this process from the beginning. I'll get to my points. I'm going to go quickly. Professor Thompson mentioned the variability of boat activity, and Mr. Ketchum from the park was very polite. He said we haven't been able to access that data. I just wanted to point out that the Park Service had asked the Oyster Company for that data several times. This is information that's in the Marine Mammal Commission report. That data is critical to provide that analysis. The Oyster Company will not provide it, so it's not possible to do any more sophisticated analysis because of that. Likewise, on sound, you need location of the boat. If you got a sound measurement, you can't backtrack to determine the sound of the boat without the location of the boat. And without that data, which it has to come from the Oyster Company, you can't do that. So I agree with Professor Thompson. It's a shame we haven't had that. I offered to help Mr. Lunny paint his boat myself. He declined. So we don't have any evidence, clear way of identifying the boats. And that is due to the Oyster Company, not the park. The second thing I wanted to point out is there was some question about, or some comment by Mr. Lunny that there had been no policy changes since the 1998 FONSI. And Lucy, this is relative to something comment you made. There have been a very significant policy change. And that is at the time of the FONSI, it was still unclear who had jurisdiction of the water. It was still unclear that the state asserted they had authority. The park questioned it. It was unclear. Now it's clear. The feds have the authority. Now individual commissioners have said, "Oh yeah, it would be nice if the state retained authority," but legally they don't. The lease ends at the expiration of the SUP, which is in 2012, not 2029. The third point is that Oyster System Services. If you look at the Ireland report from 1998, you find that there's less clams under the oyster operation. In other words, we believe that largely the high flushing rate minimizes any impact of the oysters in providing those services. But to the extent you want to look at that, you can't look at it the oysters versus zero. You have to look at oysters versus what should be there in the natural system, which is clams. And clams filter water too. Last thing, second to last thing, Section 124, there's a question about were there any changes. Yes, there were. There was addition of 74 acres of Schooner Bay that is not part of the SUP that every alternative in the DIS added into it. Why did they add it into it? Because DBOC crosses the area that it's not supposed to. It's a permit violation, and 74 acres were added so that DBOC wouldn't have a permit violation. That may be fine. I mean, it's great for DBOC. The question is, you asked, were there any changes? And yeah, here's one that was added in. That's not, Senator Feinstein didn't ask for that to be added in. It's a violation that they said, well, let's fix that by changing the acreage here. And lastly, a lot of questions about the project area. We think the project area is understated. We've heard testimony today from Mr. Lunny and other times that most of the visitors that come to their facility are customers. They're not park visitors. They don't go further. Most of them just go to that facility. Consequently, there's areas in Schooner Creek that have red-legged frogs that should be included in this. Someone spoke about why aren't the riparian acres included. Well, there's an area immediately upstream that has red-legged frogs. Sir Francis Drake crosses it. Every single customer that comes to their facility has to go down that road. That should be included in the project area. Thank you.
Good afternoon, distinguished committee members. My name is Amy Trainer. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Action Committee of West Marin. We are a 41-year grassroots environmental advocacy group. I'd like to make a few comments about the NEPA process here and relevance of the National Environmental Policy Act, as well as some other substantive comments. You're tasked with reviewing impacts from an industrial-scale mariculture operation on a congressionally designated marine wilderness area deemed the ecological heart of the Point Reyes National Seashore, which happens to be celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. As you're probably aware from Ms. Swartz, NEPA does not contain scientific standards. The resource protection standards of national parks and the Wilderness Act, which this is wilderness but for the non-conforming use, which is the oyster operation, are statutorily defined, not scientifically defined. As such, we believe that the committee is supposed to just look not at the policy, but stick to what is within the scope of the statement of tasks, looking at the scientific underpinnings. We have expressed concern on the record that there are several committee members that have worked with shellfish operators and other commercial interests, but there are no members on the committee that we know of or are aware of that have worked specifically with wilderness areas or national parks that contain marine components. So, and as you know, part of what you're looking at is the no action alternative, which means no new permit would be issued, which is wilderness, thereby upholding the 1976 Point Reyes wilderness designation. And again, I mentioned that for the context. It's one thing to talk about the oyster operator as this is a general bay on the West Coast, but it's not. Congress, in its infinite wisdom 50 years ago, gave the national people of this country a gift and said, here's your first marine wilderness area. 10 years later, the Park Service in 1972 bought Johnson Oyster Company, and as part of the purchase price said, we're going to give you basically the opportunity to practice and have your business for 40 years. But that 40 years expires on November 30th. After 1972, after that buyout, was the 1976 Point Reyes Wilderness Act, which designated this wilderness and said, you know, this is a non-conforming use, directed the Park Service to take all reasonable steps necessary to end a non-conforming use. Potential wilderness areas like this marine wilderness area are on a one-way path to full wilderness protection, and I think that context is very important to keep in mind throughout your scientific review. One strong element of the controversy the past 9 months is that the draft EIS selected the no action alternative as the environmentally preferred alternative. That under NEPA is the one that best promotes NEPA's goals, which are to choose the action that causes least damage to the environment and best protects the natural and cultural resources. NEPA's basic charter is protection of the environment and to restore and enhance the environment, which meets both the enabling legislation of the Point Reyes National Seashore and the purposes and intent carried out in the meant to be carried out under the 1976 Point Reyes Wilderness Act. So again, I would like to emphasize that the resource protections afforded to Drake Sestero are to be distinguished from multi-use bays elsewhere on the West Coast. None of those other multi-use bays have been afforded the nation's highest resource protection standards. And despite human use for the past roughly 75 years, Drake Sestero can be restored to its natural, more pristine environment, according to marine conservationists Dr. Sylvia Earle and Dr. Edward O. Wilson, and we'll be submitting their comment letter to the record. So while sifting through the many scientific claims and studies, please keep in mind that the 2009 NAS appropriately determined that The apparent absence of proof of harm does not mean there is no harm or impact from an industrial scale operation. As you've heard, there are studies that simply haven't occurred, so there are impacts that we may not simply know about. That NAS committee also appropriately determined that the ultimate fate of the decision is a policy one, not a scientific one. So I don't want you to feel like you have the weight of this whole decision on your shoulders, because you certainly don't. I'd like to finally note that there's been an outpouring of public support for Drake's Estero to receive the long-awaited full wilderness protection. On this 50th anniversary of this national seashore and on the cusp of the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act, it really matters. I firmly believe that Park Service was more than reasonable, carried out their duty to the best of their ability, and that while some people may not agree with what the draft EIS determined as the environmentally preferred alternative, the NEPA standard was more than met. Other federal agencies have said, and a third-party independent peer review has said, the standard under NEPA for this draft EIS document was met. So I'd like to emphasize that. And again, my organization by no means is against mariculture. Right around the corner in Smalley's Bay, we have a multi-use bay. We support those local businesses, and but we don't think that an industrial scale operation, any commercial use, it conflicts with wilderness. So I'd also like to ask you to think of the scientific opportunity here to have the only marine wilderness area on the West Coast, and think about the scientific opportunities that would present, both the restoration component and then having it as a baseline from which to measure all of the other multi-use bays. And so finally, my hope is that the NAS succeeds in administering a fair and transparent process that is completely void of political influence while addressing your specific statement of task, and we thank you for your service.
We have next up Dominique Richard.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Dominique Richard, and I have a background in modeling, applied mathematics, and a significant background in acoustics as well. So I reviewed all the documents actually that are being discussed here, MMC, et cetera, but I focused things on the noise aspect of it, the soundscape aspect of it, and particularly focused on the Volpe report that reports certain decibel levels that are being assumed and the experiment that they conducted, and also information that was made public from the Volpe microphone recorded near the main channel in the Estero that recorded some of the boat noise as they went by. So those two pieces of information were interesting in the sense that you had first two baseline, if you want, a 60 dB and a 71 dB for a boat. So the one was the national park, I mean, what's in the DIS, and the other one, the Volpe. The Volpe was an experiment. The other one was taken from a catalog, I think, of sound and deemed to be representative of what the boats are. The interest with the Volpe analysis is that it helps validate either one of those or none of these or whatever. And my conclusion looking at this data was that there were two things to be very careful about. One was in terms of modeling, this about 40 points of data that you have in there, and in a sense that the trips that were recorded were really very different. There was one trip that was really slow speed, that was kind of hovering all over the place, and the other one really cruising kind of speed. And given that that particular traffic is mostly is there for the water sampling we discussed earlier, it is reasonable to believe that most of this traffic will be actually cruise speed. Cruise speed is also assumed to be the kind of speed you will have between tending site. Okay, so getting a sense of what the noise is on cruise speed is an important basis to look at. So from a modeling standpoint, you look at all these points, and what you realize very quickly is that all these points are really very stratified. I mean, some of them are all high speed, and you look at the relationship between speed and noise, and at high speed, you virtually have none. Okay, you basically have randomness vis-a-vis the noise, but really don't have, the faster you go, the more noise you make. You don't have that. In the lower speed, you do. Okay, and when you think mechanically how a motor works, it actually makes absolute sense. Okay, so cruising speed is things are pretty much steady, still random because a lot of things going on that are not really tractable just by the sound, but you get this distinction now. The Volpe report gives a 60 dB, but do not, I think, give a proper description of the environment that was really worked in. In terms of environmental situation, wind, or things like that, or for that matter, with direction of the microphone, or whatever things might be happening around. Okay, so we really don't know what the 60 decibel is. I mean, yes, it is 50 feet from the boat going at normal cruising speed. I don't know what that is. There is an analysis that seemed to prove that 11 miles per hour is the cruise speed, and that corresponds to 60 dB. But when we take into account that differentiation between high speed and low speed was very significant from a statistical standpoint, then you realize that if you look at cruise speed, which would be a normal operation of a boat, you get something like 15 miles per hour as an average, and a noise that is about 63.5 decibel. Now, it's not 71, it's not 60, it's somewhere in between, it's larger than 60. Now, an important thing to take into account also is that because we're talking about random processes, what we're measuring there is an average. Okay, we can also measure the standard deviation of those noise and give a sense of the probabilities that you're actually beyond 60 or beyond 71 for that matter. Okay, so the probability that you are beyond 60 is about 75%. The fact that the probability you're above 71 is about 10%. Okay, that being said, the other problem is an acoustical problem. And the reason is that the main channel is very close to a bluff. And I looked at photography where the microphone, the Volpe microphone was, and I talked to the people who took the photography to get a sense of the relief exactly how it is. And there is evidence, and we will send you those pictures actually so you can look at that. There is evidence that most of the trip going by the main channel actually are going to be blocked by that. Now, if you start counting and start looking at what kind of attenuation you get by having a bluff like this, you can have as much as 8 decibel difference. Okay, so since the decibel estimate has been done from the microphone, what the recording of the microphone is, back to the boat by evaluating what the distance is, and then calculate it backwards if you want. If you forget attenuation, that means the sound is actually louder. Okay, I believe also that the air attenuation is not included, so that will add to it, and there's a number of other environmental things that could add to it. In my analysis, I simply added 2.5 decibel to it, accounting for all of those being extremely conservative doing that. Now you're talking about probably 95% probability of being beyond 60 and probably 30% being beyond 71. Okay. The last thing I would like to say about taking a probabilistic approach to sound like that is because the Volpe also provide the distribution of the ambient sound. Actually, it's the total ambient noise that you have, but you can interpolate that distribution and actually look at what is the chances accounting for all the environmental sound and the probability of the sound. In other words, you look at a probability being less than a particular level in the ambient, and the same probability for the noise to be more than that to see whether you can be detected. And you can find probabilities of the order of 60 or 70%, very, very often at relatively close distance, but say 400, 500 feet easily. So anyway, those are the suggestions I make. I send you the details of this analysis, and we'll send you those pictures. Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Jane.
Sorry, I have a hard time reading my own handwriting, so she's allowed me to come up here and do this. So I appreciate that, yes. Good. Yeah. I'm going to, yeah. Thank you.
Do you want to stand up?
I may use that, yes. Good afternoon. My name is Jane Georgie, and I started the oysterzone.wordpress.com blog site just to get an idea, a better understanding of what was happening. You said in your statement of what you're about, you're here to assess the scientific information, analysis, and conclusions, and evaluate the peer review in that it's fundamentally sound and materially sufficient. Well, I have 3 sons-in-law, 2 of which have PhDs, 1 of which is a world-renowned geophysicist. And I asked him about reviews. And I said, when reviewing another's work, is it typical to verify tables, quotes, and footnotes? He said, no. There's no reason to believe they wouldn't provide the truth. On October of 2011, at the NPS open house, I spoke with an employee of VHB, the contractor hired to prepare the DEIS. I asked, why is there so little data and so much hypothetical potential future impacts? She said, that's how EISs are done. It's all about potential impacts since we don't know what will happen in the future. I said, really? What about all the science? And she said, well, that's how they told us to interpret it. Her name is Tracy Ham. She's listed in the DEIS as responsible for wilderness, document production, and soundscape. In 2007, Senator Feinstein and NPS's Mary Bomar, the then director, instructed the NPS to have the NAS review the NPS science. In 2009, 3 conclusions came from that review. NPS misrepresented the data. That was 1. Number 2, no major environmental impact. Number 3, in the Harbor Seal section, Dr. Thompson himself wrote, this controversy could be cleared up if we had time and date-stamped photos of seals and oyster boats in the operations. Remarkably, a year later, Dr. Corey Goodman uncovered a 3.5-year hidden camera program instituted by Point Reyes National Seashore, begun in May of 2007, and it continued throughout the NAS review. A camera was strategically placed to capture activity by the oyster workers and the oyster boats, and they produced 281,000 minute-by-minute time and date stamp photos, which they logged and analyzed. And that data was withheld from that panel. In 2010, first, when asked by field solicitor Gavin Frost why they withheld the data, they explained that they meant to, but they forgot. Gavin Frost excused this oversight as intended disclosure. In other words, it was just withheld. In 2010, a Senate appropriations bill instructed the NPS to follow the conclusions of the 2009 NAS review. NPS dismissed the entire NAS review in one sentence, stating that the NAS had not defined the word major, as in no major environmental impact. Furthermore, the NPS summarily dismissed the photos in one sentence, stating there were no protocols for taking photos. Well, I had to ask myself, if there are no protocols required, where are the protocols for the use of a 1995 police jet ski of 70 horsepower as representative of a 20 horsepower outboard motorboat? I don't know about you, but I've been in that boat. You need to go to the Estero. An outboard motorboat. Jet ski, have you ever been near one? That's a big difference. Protocols for an oyster tumbler being equivalent to a rivet buster. Oyster tumbler, this is what it does. It tumbles the oysters. That's equivalent to a rivet buster? Protocols for a handheld drill. Gentlemen, I'm sure in your workshops at home, you own a drill in which you've driven screws into wood or something. And that's supposed to be the equivalent to a concrete-busting jackhammer. Okay. In 2009, an NAS committee concluded no major impact. So you have to ask yourselves, is there data that exists today that didn't exist in 2000? If so, then why wasn't it previously disclosed? If so, why should we believe this, given the NPS's propensity to misrepresent the data? There are 3 kinds of data you need that they didn't have in the 2009. First, harbor seals and mine-bending statistics. All I can say is one of the scientists who was key in the preparation of the original DrakesBay report, which has been debunked, claimed severe disturbance of harbor seals by DBOC workers and their boats, which are a minimum of 750 yards from the seal haulouts, 7.5 football fields. But she had just concluded a 7-year study of the effects of heavy construction work at the San Rafael Richmond Bridge, retrofit, 7 years to study hole-outs that were 20 yards to 100 yards. You had jackhammers, you had rivet busters, you had cranes, you had boats. Well, 20 to 100 yards. How big is this room? About 20 yards, 100 yards, not even the length of this building. 750 football fields, you have to go from here across the athletics complex, across the tennis courts, all the way over to the center of UC Irvine campus to get to 750 yards. Somehow, 20 to 100 yards, no impact. Her statement, her conclusion in that report, harbor seals habituate to disturbances they consider non-threatening. 20 to 100 yards or 7.5 football fields. Something strange. That same scientist had reported in 2005 her annual report on the harbor seals at Drake's Estero that there is no change in the population, no trends are seen. That study was withheld. That's her first study about the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. You won't find that in the DEIS. The Volpe report, 2 months of actual audio recordings taken at the Estero by a microphone also strategically placed within close proximity to the hidden camera. The NPS once again dismisses the findings, this time claiming a bluff obstructed the sound. Have a look at this photo. The camera is placed here strategically for line of sight. The microphone is here strategically to take in the sound. No recordings. 2 months this went on. We didn't hear anything about soundscape in 2009. It wasn't presented to you. It wasn't presented to the community. There's nothing in the Academy report, nothing in the Frost report, nothing in the MMC report. Suddenly, in 2011, it's the major data for the EIS. Without going to the Estero to take sound measurements of the actual equipment, they concluded decibel levels, the likes of which would travel miles. Decibel levels, the level at which normal conversation could not possibly be held. You're scientists, you're data-driven. You must ask, why do they hide the data? Why do they keep giving you misrepresented data? Why do they withhold data? Of the data, you do have to ask, you must ask, does it compute? Does it make sense? Does it have anything to do with the actual facts of the operation of DBOC? You have to go to the Estero. They don't want you there. They've gotten in the way of other panels getting there. Go. Listen with your own ears, see with your own eyes, and get a sense of what the reality is. Thank you very much.
All right, next up we have Jeff Cricket.
Jeff Creek, and I'm here in my capacity as an agricultural ecologist.
Is the microphone on?
Turning it on here. My name is Jeffrey Creek, and I'm here as an agricultural ecologist representing the Alliance for Local Sustainable Agriculture. I'm here to speak in support, obviously, of the DrakesBay Oyster Farm as one of the most important sustainable agriculture enterprises in the state of California. Also, our group also authored an alternative E, which we submitted to the National Park Service. It was also called the Collaborative Alternative, and it was based on National Academy's recommendation that a collaborative alternative be considered going forward, a collaborative relationship between the park, National Academy, NIMS, California Department of Fish and Game, and of course, DrakesBay Oyster Company. We're here today because Congress told the National Park Service to contract with the National Academy to review the science in the DEIS for the DBOC special use permit. The National Park Service chose to ignore that mandate and contracted instead with Atkins, and the Atkins review subsequently blew up in the park's face as an unacceptable review. And so you've begun your work 7 months later than initially proposed. Unfortunately, now you're under this time crunch. After 80 years of continuous shellfish aquaculture, Drake's Estero is today one of the healthiest estuaries in California. Yet the National Park Service has declared growing seashells by the seashore to be ecologically inappropriate. This panel really does need to go to Drake Estero, as others have suggested, and see what's going on there. You also really have to look at the NOAA and NIMS comments on the DEIS, and we can certainly provide those for you if you don't have them. To understand the degree to which the National Park Service has unfortunately fabricated harm where none exists. The National Park Service has very successfully weaponized the NEPA process. In its May 2009 report, evaluating National Park Service science surrounding the DrakesBay Oyster Company, the National Academy stated, quote, "The National Park Service selectively presented, overinterpreted, or misrepresented the available scientific information on DBOC operations by exaggerating the negative, which speaks to the ecosystem services question mentioned earlier, and overlooking potentially beneficial effects." The NAS concluded, quote, "There's a lack of strong scientific evidence that shellfish farming has major adverse ecological effects on Drake Estero, and as mentioned earlier, it is the definition of the word major, which has necessitated, apparently, the DEIS. This panel must review all of the MPS data, including that data which was concealed by omission. And I strongly recommend it to you, and I believe you have already perhaps been provided Dr. Corey Goodman's analyses, extremely detailed analyses of that data, including the sound data mentioned earlier. If there is not on this panel at least a skilled statistician, I suggest you insist that capacity be added to your team. The risk there, if you don't have someone of that stature on your panel, you may miss the subtleties of harbor seal data manipulation carried out by the National Park Service, which uses a specious correlation to claim causality and environmental harm where none exists. Again, I refer you to the NIMS comments on the DEIS and Dr. Goodman's detailed analysis for elaboration of this and many other similar errors and omissions in the DEIS. In 2009, the President of the United States, in his speech to the National Academy, said, quote, "We have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas." The President could easily have been speaking of the National Park Service handling of this very matter. In closing, we simply ask you to uphold the scientific integrity of the National Academies. Please be skeptical. Trust nothing. Verify everything. Visit the oyster farm. Demand the truth. Thank you for your service.
Next up, we have Phyllis Faber. She couldn't be here, so Jane will read her statement. Jane, can you please stand? We had some microphone issues earlier, so if you could.
Phyllis Faber provided me with the letter that she wanted read here. July 9th, 2012. National Academy Evaluation of the DrakesBay Oyster Company Special Use Permit DEIS and Peer Review. Dear committee members, I am writing my comments as I will be on an airplane and unable to speak to you in person. I was present at and a supporter of the formation of the Point Reyes National Seashore in the early 1960s. I have long been involved with coastal planning in California. I served for 7 years, 73 to 80, on the original California Coastal Commission, which addressed many planning issues for California and has successfully preserved a great deal of California's coast in an undeveloped fashion with vast amounts of public access. I am a wetland scientist and have maintained the longest set of continuous monitoring data, 25 years, for 4 wetlands in San Francisco Bay with Phil Williams and Associates, PWA. 3 sites are restoration projects, and the 4th is a control site. I am the co-founder of the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, which has removed the development rights from almost 50% of Marin's ag land under permanent easements. I list these credentials to indicate that I have long been involved in planning and ecosystem issues in the county, and I'm very familiar with the issues at DrakesBay Oyster Farm. To begin with, I am concerned that the listing of your tasks does not indicate that you will be looking at the data. The examination of the data is important. even essential to any scientific evaluation of this issue and of the draft DEIS. The NPS has collected but obscured, misinterpreted, and misrepresented a great deal of data that does not support their a priori objective to get rid of the oyster farm. The park's goal is to eliminate the outer beds, OE and OB, which are the most productive beds and essential to the survival of the oyster farm. The Lunnies bought the oyster farm and invested over $300,000 in cleaning up and improving its quality and operation. When this task was complete, the seashore, with guidance from the Sierra Club, said it would not extend the lease. The seashore has collected and attempted to keep hidden data, particularly photographic and noise data, that I hope you will examine carefully in your analysis. The Lunny family has never been asked to provide any information, nor have they been allowed to participate in any proceedings, yet their opponents are given free rein. This farm is the sole oyster cannery remaining in California and provides over 40% of California's oysters. It assists the growers on Tamales Bay in winter when they are closed down for water quality issues. By the way, Drake's Estero never is closed down for water quality issues. The DrakesBay Oyster Farm also provides oysters to Tamales Bay growers in summer when oysters from Washington are unavailable. Lunny oyster shells are being used in an attempt to reestablish an oyster industry and to restore snowy plover habitat in and around the San Francisco Bay. These activities and the strong pro-mariculture policies in the California Coastal Act, as well as the benefits to food security, all seem to be good reasons to support the continued presence of the oyster farm in the Point Reyes National Seashore. I would very much like to see someone from the shellfish industry on the panel, as their knowledge might augment the impressive expertise assembled on your panel. I wish you well as a panel. There has been a huge amount of time, money, and effort expended in Marin County to create the Point Reyes National Seashore, as well as to preserving agriculture in the park and in the county. The Sierra Club and the local environmental organization EAC state their next goal after getting rid of the oyster farm is to get rid of all of the farms within the seashore. This action will put all agriculture in Marin County at risk, as the seashore farms represent about 22% of the county's agriculture. The view of wilderness espoused by these organizations is very naive, in my view, and will serve neither the seashore nor the county well in the short and long run. Curiously, the Lunny family has never been asked for information nor consulted about any aspect of any of these studies. Why? The importance of an impartial, fully informed, and scientifically rigorous review of the facts in this case for the oyster farm, for California, for the National Park Service, and for the nation cannot be overemphasized. We are putting our faith in the National Academy of Science for honesty and fairness. Sincerely, Phyllis M. Faber.
So we're now going to turn to the phone for the first time to Martin Griffin. Operator, can you see if you can open the line for Martin Griffin?
One moment. Excuse me, this is the operator. We do not have a Martin on the phone.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to the next person. Also on the phone should be Kurt Fristrup.
We do not have that party on the phone either.
Okay, sounds good. Well, then we move to Kevin Lunny, who's in the room. Thanks, operator, for your help.
Well, thank you. You probably don't want to hear from me much more. I did want to thank you for taking very valuable time to look at this issue and sit on this panel that's so important to us, our family, our community, really our region that cares deeply about sustainable seafood when it represents such an important component. I just want to add a couple of things. A lot of things have been said. One of my biggest concerns here is that there is an openness and communication wherever possible. I know that things have to be very carefully managed, but National Academy's own rules and Park Service and Interior's rules really, and even agreements. There's an agreement signed by the director of the National Park Service and signed by me in 2007 that says the NPS agrees to consult with DBOC in good faith in the design of any further scientific or technical studies to assist in the NEPA evaluation of the project. That agreement was not withheld or upheld. We didn't hear, as a matter of fact, we learned about the NEPA processes in the newspaper. We didn't hear from the Park Service. Studies have been done, which we didn't. We see people diving under the racks, and we're wondering, what are you working on? And they say, oh, we're working on the EIS. So I'd like to see the communication and collaboration improve. And the other thing, and a point I made already earlier, is that you see a good, balanced amount of the scientific data. I noticed that you were provided the Marine Mammal Commission's final report. But what's missing, which is glaring, is Appendix F. Appendix F is critical. You have to read Appendix F from front to back. Those were the panel members' own analysis of everything they studied and everything they reviewed. Without that, something's missing. I'm not the only one that picked up a stark difference. The New York Times wrote about it, and it's called their story was a tale of two reports. It's very important that you see this Appendix F. It's very revealing, so I would just hope that you do get a full cross-section and you look at the information that you are sent later in the process, because we really are unhappy with what you were presented to begin this process. So I think I've probably said enough. I really appreciate, again, the work you're putting into this. I see I noticed that you recognize that you're going to be deluged with even more stuff, and I apologize for that, but I think it's critical to an honest and complete evaluation. So thank you.
So we'll try the phone again. Operator, I have on my list Russell Imray.
And I'm sorry, we do not have that line.
Let's go to Neil Desai.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome, Neil.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Neil. I'm representing the National Park Association. We're a organization, and
Neil, hold on. We do have some problems with the sound right now. You're cutting out. Let's see if we can fix this. Just a second. Are you on a cell phone, Neil?
I am.
Okay. All right. So I have instructions from sound in the room to try again your line, but not move too much.
Okay, I'm sitting down, and I took it off the speakerphone. So is this a little bit better? Is that better?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. This is Neil Desai. I'm representing the National Parks Conservation Association. We are a private, nonprofit organization working to protect and enhance national parks across the country, which I just been there in person for the meeting, but I'm awake.
Okay. I'm sorry. The sound is not very good. Is there any chance you have a landline nearby?
There may be some of you on the committee that are wondering what is the relationship between the 2009
Neil?
National Academy of Sciences report and the National Park Service strategy, I guess. And
Neil?
my take on that, while the 2009 NES report is the most referenced document in strategy, I guess, from what I've seen.
Angie, the operator. Neil, can you hear me?
For example, many of the National Academy of Sciences report conclusions, however, one chooses to interpret them, are not at odds with the draft EIS environmental consequence conclusion.
Neil, can you hear us?
were conducted under the context of management standards. The national object
Angie, the operator, I think you'll have to.
report did not have any management standards to consider or apply while the process does. And so the scientific underpinnings that the NAS formed its conclusions on can be interpreted differently as NEPA and has different environmental consequences. There also, maybe some of the committee were wondering how to focus on the scientific underpinnings rather than the environmental consequences, which are guided by law and policy. This is an important distinction for us. It's critical because the committee statement of task and associated committee member expertise that we've seen is scientific rather than park or wilderness policy related. And so I'll just give you an example. Maybe I put this together to Dr. Mueller. Scientific research may conclude that oyster rats provide habitat for certain benthic fauna, and as a result of this oyster rat habitat that would not exist naturally, research may conclude that there is a greater diversity of fish near the racks and less diversity of fish away from the racks. And this is what we would consider an example of scientific research that provides a scientific conclusion, not just somewhat of a scientific underpinning. Now I'll share with you what would be an example of going beyond the evaluation of the scientific underpinning and evaluating the classification or intensity, which are noted in the draft EAS's environmental consequences guided by law and policy. So one could interpret that same fauna example, the conclusion as greater diversity results due to greater biodiversity results due to oyster rack impacts, and naturally assume that such an impact is a beneficial environmental consequences. Thinking, hey, biodiversity is great, so it must be good and beneficial. However, that assumption of the impact's environmental consequence would be inappropriate and inconsistent with the national park and wilderness standards that are statutorily defined. They are outlined in law and policy, and they include management standards and maintenance and restoration efforts. And therefore, such an environmental consequence classification of the oyster rack impact would fall under adverse, and its impact intensity would be determined by the relevant standards of law, policy, and regulation. I state all this because, to some degree, we don't see there being expertise on park law and policy, and of course, you folks aren't going down that route. But it's it can be challenging to make that separation, but it's an important separation. I'd also like to just talk about the availability of data. This is separate from the example I just shared. We feel like the Park Service has used the best available data, and there's always room for improvement, and we hope the process from the public comments, of which there were more than 52,000 comments, as well as those from the peer review, and this process can help inform. But it's very important to remember that there's plenty of data that is proprietary to the DrakesBay Oyster Company, and they have a choice. They have a choice to decide to keep this financial, employment, or operational data confidential from the public, which to the most degree they have thus far, or they can make it available for analysis in the NEPA document. It's important because in the Atkins peer review, the expert on socioeconomic resources suggested various types of analysis that should be done. But the challenge is that that information can't be done by the Park Service without getting it from the oyster company. It can't be forced. It's their proprietary data. They can choose to do what they wish with it. And therefore, this analysis is just not possible. And that's been the theme that has been running in conflict for several years. And there's not much resolution that can occur. It really goes to speak to, can we actually have cooperation even between now and November of 2012, and the Coastal Commission, the Marine Mammal Commission, other agencies, and the public have raised doubts about this being able to happen. And to give an example, there was some discussion today about mitigations. Well, mitigations are important because, well, their effectiveness is only as good as, well, are they being implemented? And as recent as 2009 as well as 2012, the California Coastal Commission has cited many instances where the oyster company has not been adhering to some of the one would call regulations or mitigations intended to protect the harbor seals. And, that's written, I'll be submitting it later on today. It really speaks to the effectiveness of discussing mitigations here as opposed to, well, what is the actual actions that are going on, not what do we think can happen. Because there's a lot of speculation associated with that, and it really takes cooperation. And if we look at the track record, that doesn't look too promising. Lastly, we have a very different interpretation of the DrakesBay Oyster Company's operations than the oyster company itself, which may seem odd because we don't run the facility. Yet, time and time again, new information is presented that shows significant discrepancies, as noted by the Marine Mammal Commission and the Coastal Commission, of what the oyster company claims to be their description of their activities as to what's actually happening. Clearly, one can't have their finger on the pulse of everything, but still, what the quality control of the data, that's something that is critical. And if new information is being provided to the committee by tomorrow, of course, we're going to want that opportunity to look at that and provide any perspective we may have, assuming it's different than what's provided. And lastly, there was a gentleman there on the panel who spoke about inventory and monitoring. There's been a lot of discussion so far about certain alternatives, B, C, and D specifically, which contemplate a continuation of operations. But it's also very important, and we feel the Park Service can improve on this in their draft EIS, to actually discuss the research potential, the inventory and monitoring, the things that can occur if alternative A was implemented. That speaks to socioeconomic resources as well, the value of marine reserves and wilderness. Not easy things to review, but important nonetheless to at least have a discussion. So I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you, and I will pass it back to staff.
Okay, great. Thanks, Neil. We had difficulties hearing you in the beginning. Is there any chance you have this in writing and could email these comments to us?
Yes, I'm sorry about that, and I will send you something.
Great, thank you. That actually concludes the list of people that signed up for public comments, and I'll turn it to Tom.
Yeah, I want to give it, we have some time, and I'd like to, if somebody, if there are folks here who haven't had a chance to say something to us, this is an opportunity to do so. And I want to, once everybody has an opportunity to voice their thoughts, I have some concluding remarks to make myself. So if there's anybody here who would like to come up to the microphone and add.
Or to push star 1.
And if people are on the phone and would like to make a comment, please press star 1 and the operator will call on you.
Well, let's say if somebody's here who hasn't had a chance to say something, but I think we can also, we can be flexible enough to, if you have something to add to your comments,
and
sure.
The emphasis on new information that we haven't heard yet
Right.
or seen. Operator, is there someone on the phone that would like to make a comment?
At this time, we do not have anybody queued up for a question or a comment.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So, please. What's the guy in yellow?
This is Kevin Lenny again with a quick comment. And it's really specific to this review and the charge and the statement of task. the Park Service and the EIS did find two major impacts in the EIS. One was the soundscape, and one was wilderness. Soundscape's been highly questioned, and it'll be up to you to review what you think about the soundscape. But you're told that wilderness is off the table because it's a law and policy issue, and it's not a science issue. And I struggle with that. I think that maybe that's something that perhaps could be included, because this major impact is partially driven by the claim that it's noisy for seashore visitors or noisy for wildlife. So it's based on those same data around the sound. So it's hard to extract that from the science, because there's a science driving that major impact. By taking that off the table allows the Park Service to keep a major effect, a major adverse impact claimed against the oyster farm, and leaving that review outside your purview. So I think that that's something we'd really like to see discussed. Thank you.
Gordon, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, then I'll start with Appendix F. That was presented to a bunch of scientists before extensive data, and the Marine Mammal Commission report was after exhaustive examination of that data and sifting through all of this. So I'm not discounting those comments. I'm just saying they were preliminary, and you really need to look at the Marine Mammal Commission report. Secondly, there is a supplement, really what we consider a supplement to that report, and that is a letter from Tim Reagan to Dr. Goodman. And there was a comment about needing statistical reviews, and a lot of that was done in this, and so I invite you to look at that. A couple of other things. There was a comment that the oyster facility is in the pastoral zone. I believe it is not. It's in a special study zone. The park can address that more specifically, but I believe that's bad information. As I said before, Mr. Lunny, as the Marine Mammal Commission report indicates, was asked for information. You heard testimony from Phyllis Faber's letter that he's never been asked for information. He has been. He hasn't provided it. I can't speak for the Sierra Club nor EAC. The EAC is here, but we are not looking to remove the ranches from the park. That is a false statement. We understand that the park was formed because the ranchers voluntarily sold their property. We think that is a bargain that we want to continue to respect. So this is not something that is going to lead to the removal of the ranchers from the Park Service. Ms. Faber also made a misstatement. She said when this cleanup process was complete, the Park Service then informed DBOC that the lease would not be removed. That is not accurate. The record will clearly show that the DBOC was informed that the lease would not be renewed from the beginning. I sat in a meeting with Kevin, and I discussed this matter with him before the escrow was closed. So they knew that the lease was not going to be, could not be renewed. At least that was the Park Service's position before they closed escrow, before the cleanup process started. The question about the photograph of the bluff, the photograph that's been presented shows a very distant boat. Yeah, it's a direct line to the distant boat, but the problem is that the level of the ambient sounds makes sound collection from those distant boats very difficult, essentially impossible. So the only sounds that the Volpe camera microphone recorded were very close in. And you can see from the photographs we're going to submit that we took photographs from the microphone site, and then we moved forward to the edge of the bluff. You can see from those, comparing those two photographs, that a lot of those data points that Mr. Goodman analyzed are clearly obscured. I mean, it's not even close. And lastly, there's a comment about the San Rafael Bridge study. When Dr. Allen did that study, there was a lot of activity in that bridge. Those of you in the Bay Area may remember it. And Dr. Goodman and others have, I would say, 100% mischaracterized that study. There were incidents of machinery being dropped over the edge at flush seals, baby seals that were not returned to their mothers after that. It is true that seals will acclimate to activities that they don't see threatening. In a wilderness area, that's not, we need to have some areas where seals don't acclimate, they are natural. And I personally have nothing against agriculture or aquaculture. It is necessary to, if you want to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. But we want to break as little eggs as possible, so we want to have sustainable agriculture. 50% of the U.S. is agriculture. That's the place to go. You don't want to break all the eggs, so we want to have one place where no eggs are broken, and that's the wilderness area. Thank you.
Do we have any other?
Hi, thank you. Amy Trainer with the Environmental Action Committee. 2 quick comments. First, about the wilderness issue. This operation is considered a non-conforming use under the 1976 Wilderness Act, both because it includes a commercial operation and because it has the use of motorized boats. Those are 2 express prohibitions under the 1964 Wilderness Act. There's a comment letter that was submitted to the draft EIS by the UC Berkeley Environmental Law Society that did some wonderful research, and it shows that if a new permit is issued, it would be it was not only an unprecedented act when the rider was put on the appropriation bill in 2009, thereby opening the door for this past 3 years and all these processes for the Secretary of Interior to decide, but it would certainly be an unprecedented act if that permit is issued. Again, wilderness is on potential wilderness issue areas once designated by Congress are on a one-way path to full wilderness protection. So if you look at the wilderness issue as far as from a scientific perspective, that it has to be, I think, within that legal context. Secondly, I submitted for your review the EA's Environmental Action Committee's draft EIS comment letter, and about most of the way towards the back, there's a section on the significant noncompliance of the oyster operation. For the past 7 years, there's pretty much not been a time when they've been in compliance. And there are 2 recent letters, one from September of 2011 and one from February 1st. February 1st letter states from the California Coastal Commission they've basically been in violation of the harbor seal protection area since 2008. There's all kinds of mariculture, plastic debris in bags, and I've submitted photos and other evidence of that. So I would just say, looking at, if you guys end up weighing sort of, a continued permit and assessing the impacts based on a new permit and continued operations, you have to take into context the risk given the considerable track record of noncompliance as documented by Fish and Game, the Park Service, and the California Coastal Commission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Are we, one more, okay, please.
And just as a reminder, at this point, really hold your comments to sort of new facts to science relevant to our statement of task. Thank you.
I am glad that you're getting a taste of this issue from the controversial side. I just wanted, again, to emphasize the NOAA and NIMS document that I hope you have. Okay, great, good. I'll just read a few comments from that then. This is from the cover letter addressed to Superintendent Cicely Muldoon, received in the park on November 17, 2011. Based on the evidence and information that has been made available, the harbor seal population in Drake's Estero appears stable and healthy. We have no documentation of any recent disturbance of harbor seals by the aquaculture operation. We have no records of violations by DBOC or law enforcement investigations of DBOC under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. There is no indication of negative impacts to fish species of concern to the National Marine Fisheries Service, including ESA-listed salmonids and their critical habitat. There do not appear to be any significant impacts of DBOC operations on essential fish habitat in Drake's Estero overall. We have no records to indicate that DBOC is impacting eelgrass to the degree that eelgrass is not healthy or not providing adequate habitat value to the Estero. And they go on to make specific recommendations about how to improve the DEIS. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're probably winding down here. I just want to make if that's correct, I just want to say a couple things. Number one, I think all of us have found this very informative, both from the National Park Service and from Oyster Company and other comments. I want to assure you that this committee is working very, very hard to get its hands on all the data we possibly can and to cast our net fairly broad, and we're digging pretty deep to try to get back to original data, try to get back to as much information that we can really show as factual versus information that is conjecture. And we're actually trying to deal with that from the point of view of dealing with different levels of uncertainty based on the amount of information we have. And I can also say, because we've discussed this fairly extensively when we first began, that I don't think anybody on this committee came into this process with any bias one way or the other in this process. We're trying very hard to come up with an objective assessment. And as you pointed out, we have a very short time to do this and a lot of information to digest in the process. But let's say we're having late nights and early mornings, and we'll do our best. So thank you. You ready? Thank you all.
Thank you.